Welcome to AI Horror Stories. Prepare to be chilled. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell for daily doses of AI-generated fright. The name of the story is Handshake. The Handshake is a true ghost story about a man who dumped his fiancée before the wedding. It is also known as the Cold Hand, or the Ice-Cold Handshake. In an old forgotten cemetery, just north of Goldsboro, North Carolina, there is a headstone that is cracked in half and held together by a pair of rusty brackets. Engraved at the top, there is the strangely haunting image of a handshake. The name on the grave is George Dean's, and this is his story. Back in 1856, there was a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Vinson who thought she had found the man of her dreams. He was 8 years older than her, and his name was George Dean's. Rachel dreamed about the beautiful wedding they would have. She was head over heels in love, but unfortunately George didn't feel the same way about her. He had a wandering eye, and soon he was cheating on her with a number of other girls. When she found out that he was being unfaithful, Rachel was devastated. However, she didn't want to lose him, so she told him how much she loved him and said that she would still marry him if he stopped seeing other girls. George wasn't a very sensitive man, and he bluntly dumped her. Rachel's heart was broken, and she felt like she could never love again. She fell into a deep, dark spiral of sadness and depression. Within weeks, her uncontrollable grief made her sick. She came down with a fever and her body grew weaker and weaker. She had lost the will to live. One day, she called George to her bedside and asked him to lean in close. Then she whispered in his ear, "I realize I can never have you in this world," she said, "but I shall claim you in the next." The next day, Rachel died. She was buried in a little graveyard, and George tried to put her out of his thoughts and go on about his life. Almost a year later, George Deans was wandering home from a Christmas party, tipsy with drink. His route took him past the graveyard where Rachel was buried. As he walked, he saw a strange fog-like mist rising out of the cemetery. It came floating towards him over the headstones, and gradually formed into the ghostly figure of a woman. George started shaking and staggered backward as he recognized Rachel's face. He was so frightened that he was unable to run as the ghostly apparition came closer and closer. Suddenly it reached out and grabbed his hand. Its touch was icy cold, colder than death. Then, in an instant, the apparition vanished. George was found wandering aimlessly down the road. He seemed to be in a daze, and his right hand hung limp by his side. It was frozen solid. From then on, he suffered from excruciating pain in the hand the ghost had touched. Within days, his hand began to wither and shrivel up. Eventually, it dangled uselessly at his side. George Deans never married and spent the rest of his life alone. When he died, he was buried in the same cemetery as Rachel Vinson. In his will, he had left instructions for that ghostly image to be chiseled on the tombstone above his name. Two hands eternally clasped in an ice-cold handshake. The second story is The Curse of the Crying Boy Painting. The Curse of the Crying Boy Painting. In 1988, a mysterious explosion destroyed the home of the Amos family in Heswall, England. When firemen sifted through the burnout shell of the house, they found a framed picture, entitled The Crying Boy, which was a portrait of an angelic-looking boy with a sorrowful expression and a tear rolling down his cheek. But the picture was not even singed by the blaze. Not long afterwards in Bradford, there was another blaze, and again a picture of the crying child was found intact among the smoldering ruins. The head of the Yorkshire Fire Brigade told the national newspapers that pictures of the weird crying boy were frequently found intact in the rubble of houses that had been mysteriously burned to the ground. Journalists asked him if he thought that the picture was evil and could somehow start the fires, but the fire chief refused to comment. The reports of the unlucky painting causing fires are still occasionally reported. There was a crying boy picture found at a gutted house in Dublin in 1998, but no one has ever found out just who the child is in the supposedly cursed painting. One well-respected researcher into occult matters, a retired schoolmaster from Devon named George Mallory, claimed to have uncovered the truth in 1995. Mr. Mallory claimed he tracked down the artist behind the controversial portrait, an old Spanish postcard artist named Francat Seville, who lives in Madrid. Seville said the crying boy was a little street urchin he had found wandering around Madrid in 1969. He never spoke, and had a very sorrowful look in his eyes. Seville painted the boy, and a Catholic priest said the boy was Don Banillo, a child who had run away after seeing his parents die in a blaze. The priest told the artist to not interact with the runaway, because wherever he settled, fires of unknown origin would mysteriously break out. The villagers called him Diablo because of this. Seville ignored the superstitious priest and looked after the boy. The paintings of the little sad orphan made Seville fairly rich, but one day, his studio was mysteriously burned to the ground. Seville was ruined, and he accused the little Don Banillo of arson. The boy ran off crying, and was never seen again. Then, from all over Europe came the reports of the unlucky crying boy paintings causing blazes. Seville was also regarded as a jinx, and no one commissioned him to paint, or would even look at his paintings. In 1976, a car exploded into a fireball on the outskirts of Barcelona after crashing into a wall. The victim was charred beyond recognition, but part of the victim's driving license in the glove compartment was only partially burned. The name on the license was one of a 19-year-old Don Banillo. Could this have been the same Don Banillo who had been the subject of the crying boy painting 8 years earlier? We will probably never know, as no friends or relaciones ever came forward for the body.